Hey everyone, Ali here. So we're going to talk about navigating the HR legal minefield in all of healthcare. All of healthcare. We're just going to go global today. Yeah, so you guys have heard some of this in different ways. We wanted to get a little bit more precise with some of the tidbits on what we're going to recommend. And the reason is because it feels like we're going to war, right? It feels like we're going to war every single day when it comes to HR compliance. And in some states, it's even more warlike than others. But the reality is that we are seeing tons and tons of cases by employees, current employees, former employees, against our doctors. And so I want to make sure you have everything you need to avoid these crazy minefields. And the nice thing is that by the time we're done today, you're going to have 5, 6 pieces of nuggets that you can really put into play almost immediately in order to avoid these crazy consequences. And for those of you who are listening or watching today, and what it's like to go through something like this, you know that the cost is super expensive. And it's not just the cost of the money that you spend on a settlement, which is usually 1 to 2 times someone's annual salary. It's also the cost of the lawyers, but also the one cost that we never sort of take into account that is even more expensive than everything, which is the psychological impact that it has on you as the owner, right? It distracts you from your current office. It distracts you from trusting your other employees. And so it just becomes a really difficult thing. And so my goal always is to make sure that you are not dealing with these high costs. And HR, as much as a lot of us don't love it, it's not something super fun to always think about. It is something easy to be compliant about if you take the right steps. So I'm excited to kind of go through this with you guys today. We're going to do a really quick and dirty 30 minutes presentation. And then, of course, you're going to have all my info. You're going to have our team's info for questions. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ali Ramchin. I'm the founder of HR for Health and also of the Dental and Medical Council, which is a law firm focused on helping doctors all across the country with their partnerships, practice acquisitions, lease negotiations, and whatnot. And if you don't know what HR for Health is, it is a full service HR solution that we created exclusively for doctors to keep you compliant from A to Z, whether it's clocking in and clocking out, new hire paperwork, performance reviews, and everything and anything in between. It is made by lawyers for you so that you don't have to worry about the legal compliance side of running your office. All right, so let's jump into these categories for the agenda. We're going to talk about compliance mistakes. We're going to talk about some next steps and then some final points. So what are the 5 biggest compliance headaches that doctors face in their practices? Well, the first is really having unclear payroll. Now, most of you are thinking to yourselves, well, I don't understand. I give my payroll to this third party and they're supposed to, you know, um, run payroll for me. And so in some situations, they run payroll correctly, and in some situations, they don't. And so we've seen a lot of problems with CPAs that run QuickBooks on behalf of their clients through QuickBooks or other systems like that. We have seen people run payroll through third party, large payroll companies that don't advise them on changes to minimum wage laws, changes to documents like the I-9 and other things. And so there tends to end up being problems with running the payroll itself. And so a big point here is that you've got to make sure that your payroll is run correctly. And the way you make sure it's run correctly is that one, you have really great timesheets that are detailed in terms of the number of hours someone's working to the minute. You don't round up or you don't round down as some of these time clocks do, but you have it to the minute. And then you take that data and it automatically transfers to a payroll system that will run the payroll for you. Now, you can do that inside HR for Health. You can run payroll while running your time clocks. Or if you want to separate the two, then that's fine. Just make sure that the data from the time clock is transferred over correctly. Okay. Now, some of you, although not a huge majority of you, some of you do run, some payroll off the books. You pay under the table, you Venmo people, and things of that nature. Again, I can understand the benefits of sometimes doing that, but just please remember that there are serious fines with the IRS and the Department of Labor, amongst other entities that could come after you if you do something like that. Now, there's always two co-conspirators whenever there's a crime being made, right? And so in this kind of scenario, there are two. There's going to be you, and there's going to be, your employee that you're kind of playing these games with. And the reality is that you have a lot more to risk than they do. So if you end up firing them, or something happens and their employment, is terminated or whatnot, there's a higher likelihood that they'll come after you and report you either anonymously or otherwise. And the liability is on you as the employer. So you might think, well, they'll get in trouble too. And the reality is that most employees won't, because the onus is on you as the employer to make sure you're doing things correctly. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay. All right. The second issue that we see is overtime calculations. And now overtime calculations, depending on the state that you're in, either you follow the federal rules, which means 40 hours in the week, or you follow the state rules, which might be a little bit more generous. So it could be 8 hours in a day, or 40 hours in a week, or some variation of that. Now, where I see a lot of problems here is, one, inaccurate time clocks, like we were just talking about a few minutes ago. So not having those, right? Not having those and not having appropriate time clock systems can cause these issues. The second thing is not being aware of the overtime rules. If your time clock doesn't tell you how many hours of overtime your employees are working and how to transfer that to payroll, then it's not a good time clock, right? It's not a good, you might as well use a stopwatch at that point. A good time clock goes through all of that, right? Goes through all of that. The other aspect of this is, the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees. Exempt employees, like office managers and others that qualify, associates, don't need to be paid overtime, don't need to be given lunches or breaks, whereas non-exempt employees do. I had a situation just this morning, where I was talking to a doctor, and his consultant recommended that he switch an employee from salary, an office manager, from salary to hourly, because they thought that the office manager was playing games with the salary, taking a lot of time off and so on and so forth. Well, what that did was it changed the whole spectrum, and now this exempt employee is no longer exempt, And if they're not exempt, that means that you have to pay overtime and make sure lunches are taken at the right times and all of that. And the doctor, thinking that this person was still exempt, not realizing that this would trigger all of this, ended up not making those payments correctly. So now that the employee is going after him, there's a lot more liability than there would have been otherwise. So again, overtime calculations, super important, and really vital that you do correctly. If you have any questions about, exempt, non-exempt, make sure you reach out. And if you ever want to make a huge decision like that, please pick up the phone and call someone and ask for help before doing it on your own. All right, the next thing is not having good meal and break records. And so some states require that a 30-minute lunch be provided at minimum, and that some breaks be provided. It's anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes in the morning, 5 to 15 minutes in the afternoon. Every state's a little bit different. Like California, it's a 10-minute break in the morning, 10-minute break in the afternoon, and at least a 30-minute lunch. Some states don't have lunch requirements at all, right? They don't have at all. So how do you handle these? Well, if you're in a state that doesn't have any lunch laws, right, like Georgia and others, then I know that many of you do provide lunch to your employees. You do want them to take a 30-minute lunch or whatnot, because it's a good break and whatnot. And so if you are providing that, make sure it's in your employment manual. Make sure it's in, the system, an HR for Health scheduler or whatnot, so that it's documented about that they're being given their 30 minutes. If you're in a state that does require you to give lunch and breaks, then make sure all of that is documented as well, right? Not having proper documentation with regard to these breaks absolutely will cause you to be fined, and the fines can be, pretty expensive over the course of the year. Right? And the reason is because employees, what do? They don't claim like they missed a lunch here and a lunch there. No, no, no. What they say is, I missed lunch all 3 years that I worked there, right? I missed lunch. I never took a break because the office is so busy. Like they make these exaggerated claims, which we defend against really, really well, but they're still exaggerated. They're still, you still have to defend against it. So having really good documentation, like a really good documentation, absolutely protects you against all of these claims, all of these claims. So it's a really strong thing to do, and it's very easy to handle. So make sure you do that. And those of you that don't know about the scheduler, the new scheduler that we launched inside HR for Health that is targeted only for employee compliance, make sure you take a look at that. If you ever wanted to sign up for HR for Health, but you were like, oh, I don't know if this is a game changer. This scheduler will ensure compliance with so many laws. It's incredible. And so it takes the software to a whole other level. So make sure you take a look at it. All right, number 4, misclassification of employees. Now, we talked about this a little bit, right? This is about misclassifying employees as non-exempt or is exempt when they should be non-exempt, okay? Now, the difference between these is very important and crucial for you to know, because an exempt employee, so this is exempt from overtime, exempt from lunches and breaks, is generally limited to only a couple of people in the office. A true office manager and potentially an associate doctor. Okay, associate doctor. Now, what do I mean by a true office manager? Well, when we talk about a true office manager, we're talking about someone who manages at least 2 to 3 people underneath of them, has power, management power, to write people up, and things of that nature, to give raises, make recommendations, do performance reviews. Of course, they still have to go to the doctor or owner and get permission, but they have the power to have these meetings. And then and more than 50% of their job is actually office managerial job. So they're not answering the phones all day long, and then you also call them an office manager. That's not a true office manager. The final portion is that they need to be paid a yearly salary. Okay, a yearly salary, and this is an important part of it. You can't have just one of those things. You got to have all of those things for somebody to be exempt as an office manager. The salary is an important one because sometimes people forget to do that. Now, for an associate doctor, a lot of the same rules apply. They don't have to manage anybody or anything of that nature because they're not an office manager, but they do need to be paid a salary. They need to be a professional, a licensed professional. And so for those two groups, if you do them correctly, they could be exempt from overtime and lunches and breaks. And so this is really important because the Department of Labor and the states are enforcing these rules pretty heavily these days because they know that people are messing around with these classifications. And it's causing a lot of issues, right? It's causing a lot of issues, for practices around the country. So just make sure you're doing this correctly. There's a whole checklist and process that we can go through with you to help you understand whether or not someone's exempt or non-exempt. If you don't want to go through that and you're like, well, I don't want to, but I still want to, classify somebody correctly. If you have any doubts about them being exempt or not exempt, if you fall back on them being non-exempt, you're going to always be safer. Okay, so the standard should be non-exempt, and then if they fit the category, they can be exempt. But you can't go wrong with them being non-exempt. The problems are only if they're exempt. Okay, all right, all right. Number five is this whole concept of independent contractors versus employees. I still, to this day, get a ton of calls when it comes to this. The rules around the country are shifting away from being able to hire doctor associates as independent contractors to being required to hire them as employees. Now, there's a reason I said doctor associates. because they're the ones that in the past could have been independent contractors under certain scenarios. But I want to be clear, no one else in your office, no one else in your office that provides services to patients and to you can be an independent contractor, right? No office manager, no front desk, no clinical staff member. None of these people will ever be independent contractors, and you should make sure that you never hire them as independent contractors. If you've got an optician that wants to be an independent contractor, you say no. If you've got a hygienist, a nurse, a PA, an NP, throw out any abbreviations you want. If they're not a doctor, the likelihood of them passing the test for independent contractors is zero, near zero. Okay, so just don't take that risk. Now, with doctor associates, historically, a lot of you have been hiring them as independent contractors. I don't blame you. The law was kind of in flux. There were a lot of like interesting, tricky ways of getting around it. You sometimes incorporated them. You gave them different titles. You gave them different contracts. I mean, there was just a lot of creative ways to potentially get around this. But the way things are going with the federal government and with a lot of the states, they have made this impossible now to have. So just kind of keep that in mind. You're better off hiring them as an employee, even though it might be a little bit more costly to you, right? Even though it might be a little bit more costly to you. So just kind of keep that in mind. Is it worth the risk? It's up to you to decide. If it was me, I wouldn't take the risk anymore, because when they do come audit, they don't just come audit that, but they come audit that and everything else in your tax returns. And sometimes we've seen them go back even 3 years and whatnot. They can actually go back 7, but they can go back a number of years. And so it just becomes really, really risky. So just don't do it. I mean, my recommendation today is don't do these. I know many of you have had done these in the past, and you haven't been caught or it hasn't been a problem, but the states and the federal government are becoming a little bit more tricky with it. All right, so as we move on past the 5, so how do you actually protect your practice, right? We've talked about these 5 things. You've heard it from your friends. You've maybe seen it yourself. It's out there. You're worried. Well, the real key is to know that you're not alone, right? You're not alone. You've got your partner for compliance, sitting right here, talking to you. HR for Health is here to support you. This one of the reasons why I created it is because I wanted a solution for our doctors nationwide to make sure that they are compliant with HR, so that they can get back to business and not worry about all their employees. Okay, and that was one of the biggest problems, and that still exists, is this idea that HR compliance is too complex. Yes, it is complex, and navigating all these intricate laws that change every year can be difficult, but not if you've got a tool that helps you. So it's a really easy way for you to get compliant, is to make sure that you're relying on them and their software to make sure you're avoiding all missteps that could potentially happen. They'll give you a job description, a free employment handbook. They'll show you, how to structure pay, how to do performance reviews and everything in between. And then on top of all of that, you get to work with some HR professionals inside HR for Health, which their number one goal, right? Their job is to make sure they're answering every and any question you have, so that there's nothing that you have to worry about that you feel like, I don't know. And you don't have to pay a lawyer to do it. You just talk to them. If they, for some reason, can't answer the question or it's super risky, they'll transfer you to me. And then I, or one of my colleagues, or one of our friendly firms nationwide, will answer these questions for you. And it's a huge, huge benefit, right? So you'll get that expertise. You'll save a ton of time. It's super cost effective because it's part of your membership. And you have the peace of mind of knowing, hey, anytime I need to terminate somebody, I have someone to call and someone to that's on standby for me, which is not always the case. Okay, so So, outsourcing, HR is vitally important. We think, unless you have a ginormous practice where you can afford, people with HR degrees or whatnot, and you don't need the HR support on the back end, you will be using not just the software, but the entire team as well, And for those of you that do have a huge practice and you have some HR folks dedicated, then that's fantastic. You're going to be a couple steps ahead because now you can use the system to drive compliance while your HR professionals end up doing performance reviews and helping the team increase their performance. So as you guys know, the cost of non-compliance, it can be staggering. We've talked about this, but the peace of mind that comes with HR for health, won't not only won't break the bank, but it'll give you that peace of mind that you want. So we're here to be your compliance partner. Use us for our industry specific knowledge. Use us for our streamlined workflows that are created just with you as the doctor in mind and your offices. Make sure you're using all of our real-time compliance tracking tools that are incredible, that work on the back end and spew data out at you when you need it. Employees don't even realize that they're, using a very compliant software, and that you don't have any liability or very little liability when you use us. And these built-in practices are really made for that. Finally, as we end, we talked about the compliance side. Make sure that you talk to one of our team members so that they can show you the software to see if it's a good fit for your office. But guarantee that you won't be disappointed and that you're gonna be really happy that you're using something that you have confidence in, that was created by lawyers, meant for doctors, and then more importantly can be used in a really kind of simplified fashion that's not going to take up a lot of your time. Now, if you guys would like to talk to one of our team members, again, no pressure at all. Just scan this QR code, and it'll take you to a page that will allow you to kind of chat with one of them at a time that's convenient for you. Of course, if you ever have any questions, reach out to me. I'm easy to find. Make sure that you bring your comments, your notes, your questions, your concerns, so we can drive to a solution for you. But I look forward to hopefully seeing you guys at some live seminars that are all back and active, and I hope to see you in the HR for Health family. Thanks everyone. Have a good night.